Hi, I'm Brett Ruland. I run a store called Spoonful Records. I am actually from Columbus. I'm from the east side, and I went to Fort Hays, which is pretty close to CCAD, so I always kind of saw CCAD growing up and kind of always wanted to go to CCAD. When I was looking at art schools, I considered some outside, I know like maybe Chicago and a few others, but CCAD was always kind of there. I remember skateboarding on the campus before, when I was still in high school, and I went to Fort Hays, which was real close to CCAD. So I feel like I looked at other schools, but I felt like CCAD was the one. I think right when I went into CCAD, I was really just, felt like I was a good artist, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I think when you're in high school, you're kind of like the star artist, but when you go to CCAD and you realize that everybody's a good artist, like you have to really kind of figure out your own style to stand out. And I think that's what kind of helps, especially freshman year when you're learning the different courses and mediums and stuff. When I graduated from CCAD, just like a lot of you, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. I put out my resumes and I kind of, had high hopes. And the first job I was offered was a newspaper job, and it didn't sound that glamorous, but I thought, let me get some work on the programs and get better at designing things. I think seeing that the art museum needed a designer, it was kind of like a dream job for me. So when I worked at the art museum, they told me, we've got all this equipment. If you want to do any other design work for anybody, you're welcome to do that. And so I kind of, started a record label for some bands here in Columbus. Did that as a hobby, and one of the bands that I did was a band here called the Tough and Lovely, and I had worked with this gentleman right here, Andy, and some designs for some other albums and bands he was in. And at some point, he was telling me that we need a record label, so at some point I thought, well, why don't I just start a record label? And so that ended up, Spoonful Records was the name I came up with. I was there for 12 years. With the art, sometimes, budgets get cut and different things. So I did survive a lot of budget cuts there. 12 years later, when I was let go, I thought, man, I really have to figure out what I want to do now, because you want to do something different. I think you don't want to get kind of stuck in the same routine. So my wife, actually, I was actually talking to other people, asking them ideas and stuff, and it was actually my wife, Amy, was like, you should open up a record store. You got all these records, you're into designing album covers, that kind of thing. This could be a good niche for you. So we're located at 144 East State Street, downtown Columbus, kind of near CCAD. That was another thing I wanted to do here. But this used to be an art gallery, so we really liked when we saw the space. All the lighting, the track lighting was in place. And when we first opened, all the white space up above was just blank, and so a lot of people are like, can I put my artwork up there and that kind of thing. We had a few paintings in here, but Amy is also a painter, and she started making paintings for the space. So the majority of the works in here, my wife, Amy Kesting, painted, and, a lot of them are album covers, that she was inspired by. I think, since opening the store, and I mentioned earlier, my wife Amy does a lot of the paintings. She did a painting of the band Kneecap from Ireland. I think that almost was like a way to draw them into the store. She said, I'm going to do a painting of your album cover. Maybe you guys could stop by before the concert. And then they showed up on 3 scooters and came in, and it was just really a good time having them stop by. So I think that having the shop, a lot of musicians like to record shop and everything. It's great that they stop by sometimes. We had some other people stop by. Taylor Hawkins, the Foo Fighters, had stopped by. Billy Corgan, the Shins.
So my name is Jared Bowdish. I'm actually not originally from Ohio or even the Columbus area. I've lived here for a while. Being a non-traditional student, I didn't come into the situation until I was like in my 30s, right? So I kind of like lived life in the Columbus area first, experienced things, and then went to CCAD. And kind of what made me stay here after graduation, if I'm being honest, I had my roots already kind of set in the moment, right? So like I have, wife and kids, we have a house and everything like that. So that was part of the factor, but I also made a lot of connections, right, when I was in school. So industrial design wasn't as forward in the spotlight as it became after like introductories to things like the iPhone, right? Going through life, figuring out what I like and don't like by trial and error, it was kind of wearing on me. So then later in life, I was like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? I was fortunate enough to have a contact who is an architect designer. And that individual kind of, long story short, introduced me into the idea of product design, and that's kind of how I found CCAD, is through that connection. I went to CCAD, toured the program, met with people at the campus, and it just seemed right. So I don't know if I had maybe a distinct goal, right, or a passion when I went, except for a desire to make a change, right, and do something different with my life and be able to provide more for my family, because I didn't go to college yet. I think that's kind of when I got there, but after being at CCAD and kind of experience there, I feel like my whole direction changed. I mean, I went in for product design, I ended up going into UX research, so that was like one thing that drastically changed. I started to create these goals of wanting to give back more to the community. And I found myself doing more things of like bringing students in, like when I worked here at Lexington, for example, like bringing students in from different departments and talking about, how we do research and why we do research, for example. So I think those are how my goals evolved, was I wanted to give back more to the art and design community, especially CCAD, because it was right here in our backyard. I know it sounds so corny. It sounds super corny, especially because I'm now in my 40s, right? But it's such an important part of my life. That 4 years that I was there really changed everything, right? Going back to school in your 30s, you've built a house, you've got kids, you're married, like that's the last thing anybody wants to do, right? I mean, you guys know how hard school is right now as it is, and it's just you. I was doing a project my senior year. We had partnered up with 99P Labs and Honda R&D, and was doing a project on the future of mobility. And doing that project with them, that truly set me up, I think, for a lot of success and a lot of what to do in the real world, because I was dealing with clients. But that's kind of what transitioned me to here. We came to Lexington to kind of learn how they do research here and how they practice it. And that's how I met Mark and Chris and Marty and them, was being here and kind of learning how they do it. And I just kind of started asking questions, being the person that I am. I was like, hey, why do you do this? And what's up with that? And then Mark reached out to Yager, and that's kind of how that connection formed, right? So Lexington is a human experience firm. What they do is design research, UX research, and they understand the how, the what, and the why. It's the fuzzy front end is what we like to call it. So we use research to understand what drives people's behaviors and decisions in using a product. Why do they want to use a product or an experience? And so that's kind of how CCAD set me up here and what we do here. And then now, because of all of that, I've transitioned from here, and I'm now doing the same type of stuff, but I'm at JP Morgan Chase. So I've now taken that from what I've learned at CCAD into Lexington, and I've now taken it into corporate America.